So here we are at McFall Cemetery in Wayne County, Tennessee. This is the property of Daniel and Nancy whenever they moved to Wayne County from Franklin County, Tennessee, right around 1821, 1822. In 1880, they were in the Franklin County, Tennessee census records. So they moved to Wayne County shortly after all that. Daniel and Nancy is our patriarch in the McFall family. Daniel and Nancy are Pugh's grandparents and Maddie's great-grandparents. As we walk up the hill to McFall Cemetery, it's a really steep hill, and whenever they would bury people out here, they would have a line of people to carry the casket. So they would just exchange hands on the casket and carry it up the hill. And the hill is very steep. Another story out here is that one year there was a fever that struck Second Creek, and more people were, passing away than they could dig holes, so they buried people together. This is the beginning of McFall Cemetery. There's graves all the way up there. And graves back here. It appears they've been doing some logging here lately. But I'm going to start with Pugh and Maddie up the hill. So right here is Pugh and Maddie. They're Lee and Carrie's parents. Pugh and Maddie were second cousins. And I'm going to talk about some names that I will use throughout this video that I am filming for you. And I'll just kind of go through Maddie's family first. So Maddie was the daughter of General Washington McFall and Martha Elizabeth Hinton. Everybody called her Elizabeth. General was known as Wash until he got married to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth. She was known as Elizabeth until she moved to Arkansas with her second husband. But whenever they got married, they, instead of going by Wash, he went by General. And according to some of the great nieces and nephews, the reason that he went by General was because he was so strict with his family. And when General passed away, Elizabeth ended up marrying second to a man named James P. McFall. And James P. McFall is the great grandson of Daniel and Nancy. His grandparents are John Alexander McFall and Margaret Clark. John Alexander McFall would be Pugh's uncle and Maddie's great uncle. His parents was James M. McFall, known as Jim, and Sarah Ann Gillis. Now, going back with Sarah Ann Gillis is actually an aunt to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, which would be Maddie's mother. Because Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, she was the daughter of Samuel Wilson Hinton and Martha Gillis. And Martha Gillis and Sarah Ann Gillis were sisters. And as we kind of like scroll into this cemetery, Now, I don't know where Maddie's father is buried, but I have noticed that there is an unmarked grave beside Maddie, as you can tell. Let me kind of like zoom in. Right there's kind of like a headstone. Coming back here in the back, there's a footstone. Of course, you know Maddie's got a footstone, and Pugh's got a footstone back there. Now, General's parents was James Duncan McFall and Maria Elizabeth Palmer, and this right here is their graves. Maddie is actually buried fairly close to her grandparents. Now, James Duncan McFall, everybody talks about the spelling of his name, McPhaul, which that is the old spelling of the McFall name. It was misspelled in a deed, and we ended up taking the McFall's name, McFalls, and then over time many of the family just dropped the S. But as you kind of look at the bottom of this inscription, it says, "Prepare to meet thy God, for ye think, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh." Now, James was an atheist, and everybody would talk to him about God and stuff like that, and he would just shake his head and wouldn't really have, you know, anything to do with it. He was also a fairly wealthy man, and I believe he owned like right around 1,000 acres out in here. And so when he passed away, they put that inscription on his tombstone. A lot of people said that, you know, he was pretty much like old school. So, you know, that might be the reason why he kept the McPhaul name. His wife, Maria Elizabeth Palmer, she was born in Indiana, and they moved into this area, her and her family. James Duncan McFall was also Pugh Alexander McFall's uncle. So that would be Lee and Carrie's great-grandparents through their mother's side, and great-uncle through their father's side. Pugh Alexander McFall was married 3 times. He married first to Mary Elizabeth Lawson and had Andrew McFall, Frances Josephine McFall, Ada McFall, Ed McFall, and there's a possibility he had another son named Pugh McFall Jr. And whenever Mary Elizabeth Lawson passed away, he married second to Maddie, which Maddie's real name is Martha Elizabeth McFall. Everybody called her Maddie. And then when Maddie passed, Pugh married a 3rd time to Ollie Janie Delilah Williams. And she had a sister, which Ollie Janie Delilah Williams was known as Janie. She had a sister named Maddie Lou Williams that married Pugh's brother, Marion Andrew McFall. And he's actually buried down there at the bottom of the hill, and we'll see him shortly. Going behind Pugh, you will see a grave of a woman named Matilda Purley Sullivan. She was actually a McFall, and she was the daughter of James Monroe McFall and Margaret Matilda McFall, which Margaret Matilda was James Monroe's second wife. Now, if you're following along, Maddie, which would be Pugh's wife, and Lee and Carrie's mother, her stepfather, Maddie's stepfather, James P. McFall, was a brother to Margaret Matilda McFall. And then James Monroe McFall, which would be Matilda's first husband and James Monroe's second wife, which James Monroe is actually buried back there. James Monroe is Maddie's uncle, General's brother. James Monroe was a Civil War vet. He served on the Union side. And as you turn around and you kind of look, I don't know how well you can see this, but there are several unmarked graves out here. Right there is like an old, like a funeral home marker. Right there appears to be another unmarked grave that's there with a field stone. But as we kind of like move around, kind of going down the hill, I'm in the next row here. This is Martha Jane McFall, wife of James Monroe McFall. Now, Martha Jane was the daughter, well, she was, her maiden name was Hinton, so her real name was Martha Jane Hinton. And she also has a sister buried out here named Nancy Ellen Hinton. But Martha Jane Hinton and Nancy Ellen Hinton were genetic siblings, or also known as a double first cousin to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, which would be Maddie's mother. Now, Maddie's mother Elizabeth, her father Samuel Wilson Hinton, and Martha and Nancy's father James Hinton were brothers. Martha and Nancy's mother, Elizabeth Gillis, and Elizabeth Hinton's mother, Martha Gillis, were sisters. Now, as we go back here in the back, I just walked into a spider. There is just a pipe sitting out of the ground, and it's been a while since I've been out here, but it appears somebody has put like a flower arrangement around it. So somebody's been out here. But here's a grave of Callie Newman. Try to get it to focus up here. Now, Callie Monroe, she was a McFall. She was the daughter of James Monroe McFall and Margaret Matilda McFall. Of course, James Monroe McFall is buried right there. And of course, James Monroe McFall was Maddie's uncle. So this would be Maddie's first cousin. Now, when Callie passed away, she was married to James Robert Newman. And of course, you know, James Robert Newman became a widow. And also Pugh Alexander McFall, you know, he passed away in 1916. And as you look at this tombstone, Callie passed away in 1921. But anyways, Pugh's third wife, Ollie Janie Delilah Williams, known as Janie, or how the family affectionately referred to her as Aunt Janie, married James Robert Newman, which would be Callie's husband. I have heard it talked about that Janie may have had a miscarriage, but I don't know if it was with Pugh, who is buried like right there with the tall tombstone, or if it was with James Robert Newman. As we move down the hill a little bit, we come to a grave of John Wesley McFall. John Wesley McFall was the son of James Monroe McFall and Martha Jane Hinton, which their graves I just talked about right up there. I don't know how well this shows up on camera, but there appears to be two unmarked graves right here, and I don't know who they are. Daniel and Nancy are supposed to be buried out here, but they don't have a tombstone. So that could be a possibility that this right here is Daniel and Nancy's graves, but I'm not 100% certain. There is a little statue of an angel. We move over here. It's of a little child, and it's just an angel with some field stones right beside it. As we work our way down the hill even further, you'll see that there's some more unmarked graves around. Right here is an infant child of E.J. and H.M. McFall. E.J. would be Lice Jackson McFall and Hetty Mariah McFall. Lice was Pugh's brother, and Hetty Mariah McFall was the daughter of James Monroe McFall and Margaret Matilda McFall, which James Monroe was buried on top of the hill up there. And James Monroe would be Maddie's uncle. Now when you come right beside his grave, I think that was an infant son, pretty sure it was, you have James McFall, son of Samuel and Lavina McFall, which Lavina was Tercy. Samuel and Tercy were Pugh's parents. This would make James Pugh's brother. James, I don't believe he was ever married. I think he passed away either in his late teens or early 20s. So, there's his grave. Then whenever we move on down, we end up getting across Samuel David McFall's grave, which, as you can tell, the tombstone is in pretty bad shape. Samuel David McFall is Pugh's father. It's also Maddie's great uncle. Samuel was a Methodist minister. His wife, Lavina, or Tercy, her family moved here from South Carolina, and her family started Wesley's Chapel, United Methodist Church. And of course, you know, her tombstone has been broken. Back here in the back, you have a J. Mott, or it says J. McT. I'm not sure what that is. Right beside Samuel and Tercy's grave, you will find a grave of Velma McFall. She was the daughter of William Kendrick McFall and Roxy Sarah McFall. William was known as Bill, and Bill was Pugh's brother. So this is Pugh's niece. Roxy Sarah McFall was the daughter of John Samuel William McFall and Elizabeth Catherine Ferris. They are buried at Centenary Cemetery, which I'll go up there and I'll show the graveyard to you. Elizabeth Catherine Ferris was known as Betty, and Betty was a sister to Tercy, which that would make Bill and Roxy first cousins through the Ferris family. And then John Samuel William McFall, which would be Roxy Sarah McFall's father, She was Maddie's uncle. He was a brother, he was a brother to James Monroe McFall that's buried up there on top of the hill. This grave is of J.M.B. McFall, infant son of W.B. McFall and N.A. McFall. W.B. would be Wesley Burr McFall and Nancy Ann White. Wesley Burr McFall was Maddie's uncle, General's brother. So, you know, you got James Monroe, General, Wesley Burr. And as you move away from Wesley Burr's child, you come to a tombstone. There's actually two of them out here. I've been doing this for 20 years, and over the course of 20 years, this newer tombstone has been added to this cemetery. But this is M.A. McFall's. M.A. McFall would be Marion Andrew McFall. Everybody called him Bud. And Bud was Pugh's brother. Bud married first to Pearlie Hinton, and they had Roxy McFall, Nipsey McFall, Burr McFall, Luther McFall, and Arthur McFall. And then when Pearlie Hinton passed away, which Pearlie Hinton was actually first cousins to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, which would be Maddie's mother. Say that 5 times fast. But Bud married second to Maddie Lou Williams, and they had 2 children together, Samuel Kelly McFall and Elmer Claude McFall. Samuel Kelly went by Kelly, Elmer Claude McFall went by Claude. Maddie Lou Williams was a sister to Ollie Janie Delilah Williams, known as Janie. Janie was Pugh's 3rd wife. As we move away from there to here, you will end up with a Rosa J. McFall, daughter of J.M. McFall and N.E. McFall. J.M. McFall would be Joshua Marion McFall and Nancy Ellen Hinton, which I've kind of explained how Nancy falls into the play. She was a sister to Martha Jane Hinton that's buried on top of the hill. Joshua Marion McFall was Maddie's uncle, General's brother. And then as you move over here, you have Mariah E. McFall. She was also a daughter of Joshua Marion McFall and Nancy Ellen Hinton. And as we move even further back, we end up at the graves of Nancy Ellen Hinton, wife of J.M. McFall, which would be Joshua Marion McFall. And then over here, we have Joshua Marion McFall. And as I don't know how well you can tell that, but it appears that he was a Freemason. Joshua was also a Civil War vet. He was a brother to James Monroe that's buried on top of the hill. James Monroe and Joshua had another brother named Daniel Newton McFall. And all 3 of those brothers served in the Civil War. And when they were discharged, they all went to Nashville together to get their discharge papers. And they traveled together for safety precautions. And then as we move over here, I don't know if I've said this yet or not, but Joshua Marion McFall was also Maddie's uncle. And Joshua Marion McFall, James Monroe McFall, General McFall, John Samuel William McFall. I'm trying to think who else I've talked about out here. But all those people are also first cousins to Pugh. I'm just saying, you know, how they're related, you know, the closest way, you know, uncle, grandfather, you know, etc. But as you move over here, you have a grave of Janetti A. McFall. Janetti was a daughter of Joshua Marion McFall and Nancy Ellen Hinton. Now there is a story that there was a girl that ended up, kind of going crazy, and she ended up committing suicide. And everybody's thinking that it's Janetti. Janetti would be first cousins to Maddie, which would be Carrie and Lee's mother. And as we move even further forward, we're back at the bottom of the hill, as you can tell. We got E.J. McFall and Hetty McFall, wife of E.J. McFall. Now, E.J. McFall is Lice Jackson McFall. He's a brother to Pugh. He was the baby of 13 children, so Pugh was one of 13 children. Lice and Hetty, they moved to Lawrence County, Tennessee. And whenever they moved there to have better education for their children. Two of their children that, I get asked about how they're related to people is Lawrence and Jones McFall. They were school teachers. And that is their parents right here, E.J. and Hetty. Hetty was the daughter of, her real name was Hetty Mariah McFall. She was the daughter of James Monroe McFall, which is on top of the hill, and his second wife, Margaret Matilda McFall. So I've showed you two other sisters of Hetty's up there on top of the hill. Now, whenever Hetty and Lice were dating, Hetty had a brother named Charles. And Charles was kind of a rowdy guy. Anyways, Charles ended up shooting at Lice and Hetty whenever they were dating, and he ended up shooting Hetty's dress whenever they were sitting like on a log talking to one another. It appears that this graveyard at one time was fenced in, as you can tell by these stumps, concrete, I'm going to call them stumps. It's also backed up by rebar. There used to be another one like right here that, kind of appeared to like form a gate where you can actually come in. There's one down there past where Pugh's buried, but it kind of shows like the boundaries of the cemetery. There used to be some old barbed wire that used to be buried underneath the ground, which I'm not seeing it now, which also indicates that it used to be fenced in. But this is McFall Cemetery. As you drive down the road from McFall Cemetery, you end up passing a house, which the house is right here. This house is not exactly the same house, but this house is where Daniel and Nancy's old homestead used to be. So this is where they lived when they moved to Wayne County. Now we're at Centenary Cemetery, where there's a lot of family buried out here too. But I'm not going to go through like everybody's grave. I'm just going to go just point out the big things, because my battery on my camcorder is kind of going down. So out here you have William Kendrick McFall and Roxy Sarah McFall. William Kendrick was known as Bill, and Bill was Pugh's brother. Of course, right here's their foot markers. Roxy was Maddie's first cousin. She was also Pugh's first cousin. William Kendrick and Roxy were first cousins through the Ferris family, and second cousins through the McFall family. Right beside their graves, you have the biggest tombstone in the cemetery, or the tallest. So that's the tallest tombstone out here. So the tombstone is John Samuel William McFall. This would be Maddie's uncle. And then on the other side here, we have Elizabeth Catherine McFall. She was a Ferris. She was a sister to Tercy. Now Tercy and Betty had a brother named Richard Ferris, which Richard is buried right here. So this right here would be Pugh's uncle. Now Pugh's first wife was Mary Elizabeth Lawson. She was the daughter of Thomas Jefferson Lawson, known as TJ, and Rachel Blue. Matilda, which would be Richard's wife, she was a sister to Rachel Blue. So it's kind of weird, but you know, several of Mary Elizabeth Lawson's aunts and uncles married several of Pugh's aunts and uncles. So this is just one example of that. Now back here, you have infant daughters of George and Leona Perkins. George and Leona would be Lee's in-laws. And also you have right here Clarence, son of George A. and Leona Perkins. Leona was a Hinton. And this right here would be Leona's brother, Leona's sister, and I'll get to a story with Viola here in a second. And this is Leona's parents, Robert and Mary Jane. Now, Viola, I'm assuming that she passed away. I don't see no dates on here. But Robert was taking care of one of their kids, one of her kids, and the father of the kid came and got the child, and Robert ended up beating the guy, you know, and he ended up staying at a house that's down the road, which I want to take you and let you see the house. But it's also known as Whit and Roxy's old home place. This is Whit and Roxy. Roxy was a McFall as well. If you remember up there at McFall Cemetery, Mary and Andrew, which is the cemetery or the grave marker that has two grave markers, he was known as Bud. That's his daughter. Whit would be first cousins to Leona. Now this house that I will drive by and let you see, it was built by Whit's father, Coleman Hinton. Coleman Hinton was Leona's uncle. On the other side of Robert Hinton is Charlie Hinton. Charlie Clyde Hinton. I was told that he passed away in a sawmill accident. This would be Cora Perkins' uncle. As we move forward in the cemetery, you will come across the grave of Nancy Pearlie Morris. Right here's her tombstone. She was the wife of William Matthew Morris. Nancy was a Hinton. She was a sister to Robert Hinton, that's buried over there. So this would make Nancy Leona's aunt. Florence, she was a McFall. She was Lee and Carrie's first cousin. Mary Elizabeth Hinton, she was a Morris. She was a sister to William Morris. And she ended up marrying Coleman Carlisle Hinton. Everybody called him Dick. He was an uncle to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, which would be Maddie's mother. An uncle to Robert, uncle to Nancy. I'm trying to think who else. Uncle to Nancy Ellen Hinton, uncle to Martha Jane Hinton, and so on and so forth. As we continue walking, you will come across a grave of Roy McFall and Edith Henson. Roy was Ed's son. Ed would be a half-brother to Lee and Carrie. Hazel Henson, McFall Hardison, which is buried right there. She was at one time a daughter-in-law of Ed. She was Raymond's first wife. These right here are some grandkids of Ed's. Of course, Peggy is also a grandchild. Joy is also a grandchild. As we move around the cemetery, you will come across Ada and Pugh. Pugh might be a son of Pugh Alexander McFall and his first wife, Mary Elizabeth Lawson. I cannot prove or disprove it. Ada was the daughter of Joshua Marion McFall and Nancy Ellen Hinton, which we visited their graves at McFall Cemetery. You'll come across Lillian, Troy, Lillian, Troy, and Sims Duncan. They are sisters to Ada down there. Alice would be Sims' wife, Alice Bratton. There's a daughter of theirs. Right there is Alice Bratton's mother. And then Sims had a son named Elmer McFall that married Donnie McFall. Donnie would be Ed's daughter. James Russell is one of their kids, Donnie and Elmer's. Charles is a son of theirs. Link is a grandson. Link passed away in a car accident. Billy Ray, son of theirs. Anthony is Billy's boy, I believe. Then Lance is also a boy of theirs, and little Bill. But also back here, you have a sibling to Sims and Ada, and all them would be Mary Howard. There's her husband, Lewis. And then there's one more over here. There it is. John Wesley McFall was also a son of Joshua Marion McFall and Nancy Ellen Hinton. Wesley was killed. He was beaten to death. So over here we have Zeb Hinton. Zeb Hinton is a uncle to Maddie, Lee and Carrie's mother. He is a brother to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth. Here you have Samuel Kelly McFall, or he was known as Kelly. He was the son of Mary and Andrew McFall, known as Bud, which would be Pugh's brother, and his second wife, Maddie Lou Williams, which would be Pugh's third wife, Ollie Janie Delilah Williams, known as Janie's sister. William Horse is a son of Kelly. Burr and Eula is, Burr would be first cousins to Lee and Carrie. He's Pugh's nephew. Burr is a half-brother to Kelly. That's three of their infant children. Eula was the daughter of James Duncan McFall, known as Dunk, and Molly McFall. Molly was a sister to James P. McFall. James P. McFall is, of course, Maddie, which would be Pugh's second wife, which would be the mother of Carrie and Lee. James P. would be her stepmother. So grandfather, excuse me. James P. is Maddie's stepfather. So step aunt. And then of course James Duncan McFall, he was known as Dunk. If you remember that big tall tombstone over there, that would be his parents. So he was first cousins to Pugh through their mother's side. In front of Kelly you have Frances Marion Williams and Betty Williams. I believe she was a Martin. This would be Janie and Maddie Lou Williams' parents. Of course, Janie was Pugh Alexander McFall's third wife. James Duncan McFall and Molly McFall. James Duncan, of course, was known as Dunk. They had a daughter named Willie Pearl McFall. And she ended up marrying Alan Oscar Darby. And Alan Oscar Darby was a brother to Charlie Darby, John Darby, and Lenny Bett Darby. Now Charlie and John and Lenny Bett, they had a uncle named David James Darby. And he ended up marrying Nancy Pearlie McFall, and Nancy was a sister to Pugh. Now Carrie, she ended up marrying John Wilson Darby, and John Wilson Darby was a nephew to Lenny Bett, John, and Charlie. Nancy McFall would be a sister to Molly down there. And then John Henry McFall would be a brother to Dunk down there. Now Nancy and Molly were sisters to James P. McFall, and of course James P. McFall would be Maddie's stepfather. Now their mother is buried right here, and her name is Sarah Ann Gillis. Sarah Ann Gillis McFall was also an aunt to Martha Elizabeth Hinton, known as Elizabeth, which would be Maddie's mother. Way back here in the back, past that barn, way back there, there's a creek. And there used to be a cemetery along that creek. And then in the early part of 1876, a flood came down through here and washed out the cemetery. So they ended up building a cemetery on higher ground. And they named it Centenary in honor of the 100th year of signing the Declaration of Independence. This is how Centenary got its name. This house right here is the house that Leona's uncle built. As you can tell, it's kind of getting overgrown. This place was also known as Whit and Roxy's place. And this is the place where Leona's father came and hid out when everybody was looking for him when he killed his son-in-law. This is a cemetery called Lawson Cemetery. It's also known as Lawson Rich Cemetery. Pugh's first wife is buried out here, and her tombstone is right here. Mary E., daughter of T.J. and Rachel Lawson, wife of Pugh McFall, born November 15th, 1855, and died November 28th of 1887. You move on, you'll see a sister of hers buried right here. name's Martha. My brother, Thomas J. And David.